Hey everybody, it's Phil Strazula from Select Software Reviews. Talking to two entrepreneurs today about an ethical streaming technology. Uh, Russ and Yariv, thank you guys so much for joining me. Do you guys mind giving me a quick background on yourselves and kind of what you're up to at Verensics?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I appreciate it. So my name is Russ Law. I'm CEO and co-founder of Verensics. My background is corporate security, actually. I was with ExxonMobil corporate security for about 10 years before jumping into the entrepreneurial world and have been running Verensics together with Yariv for the last, 7 years now, Yariv? So I'll let you introduce yourself.
My name is Yariv. As you can hear, I have an accent. I'm an Israeli. My background is security for the most part, governmental agencies and private sector. I've been posted here about 13 years ago on a diplomatic journey, and I end up staying here.
Nice. That's awesome. Thank you guys so much. I'm kind of curious, like, how did two people with security backgrounds get into the HR world?
So I
Well,
was almost by accident, really. One of the things that I saw certainly when I was working in the oil industry, in security, was when I would do investigations. A lot of times when we started kind of digging into, who these employees were who were doing things they weren't supposed to do at work, and when I say doing things they weren't supposed to do, you know, laundry list of counterproductive behaviors, things from sexual harassment to fraud to theft, to even workplace violence. I mean, it really runs the gamut into bad behavior. You know, what I noticed as a trend over and over again was that there were red flags when these people were hired, that they were not going to be the ethical, great employee that, everybody just said, well, maybe it'll work out. And lo and behold, we're investigating several years later for, stealing information or for, sexual harassment or whatever. And I just noticed that trend over and over, that if you look for the red flags, they were there. And what, when I really started kind of digging into like the why, the root cause, I just noticed that the main tool, almost the only tool that's used by most companies, agencies, organizations, you name it, is a background check, a criminal background. Which a criminal background check is one of these things that it's really kind of a broken system. It is based on third-party data that is totally uncontrollable, really, when it comes down to it, because that third-party data is only going to be available if someone reports a crime that happened at work. So, say for example, I, end up getting fired for stealing. If my employer doesn't report that to the police, then the next place I go to work, if they do a background check on me, guess what comes up on the background check? Nothing. It's totally clear. And so you have this, trough of data that everybody keeps going to feed from, and nobody's actually feeding into. And so that's what, when Yariv and I kind of started talking through the beginnings of Verensics, that was one of these things where we're like, the the only tool that's out there is completely ineffective, but everybody still uses it. And that's kind of the way that we ended up kind of getting into working with HR so much, is because that background check process is typically owned by human resources. And it's kind of one of those weird things where it's like, this is owned by human resources. It's a product that really doesn't work nearly as well as it's built to work. And if it did, we would see a lot less unethical behavior in the workplace. And one of the things Yariv likes to say is that the only reason that corporate security or audit or insider threat even exists is because we didn't vet these people well enough at the beginning. If we vetted people that well at the beginning, we wouldn't have people acting like this in the workplace, and these kinds of things wouldn't continue to happen. So I know I kind of went off on a soapbox there, Phil, but you gave me a nice runway. Yariv, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, to me it was pretty natural step to do. You know, in Israel the system work quite different. Um, you don't get a position in sensitive position or in I would say desirable organization without going and having an interview with security before you even uh, get any consideration for moving on in the process. And the way that it typically works back home, you know, serving in the IDF, it's kind of mandatory. Every people that serve in, I would say, top unit or elite unit, essentially agencies like the Israeli security agencies contact them trying to recruit them. You going through some training program, and then they put you on the field, and that's what are going to open your door to do corporate security. So corporate in Israel, corporate security in Israel, bring people that have kind of a little bit different background, and they understand that the capability of those personnel to investigate, to interview is higher than the training that HR personnel have received in their career. And therefore, part of the process is having this interview and trying to gather meaningful intelligence or data from the candidate. So for me, it was pretty obvious transaction to do given where I'm coming from.
Yeah, it's a super interesting founding story, and it makes a lot of sense. And I think it resonates with myself. I imagine it resonates with a lot of people about why you guys went down this path. Can you talk a little bit about how your system will do a better job at background checks, and how you know that it's doing a better job, I guess, you know, at the other end of the spectrum, like what percentage of people actually end up stealing something or, you know, kind of committing one of these crimes?
Sure.
Russ, do you want to take it or me?
Yeah, I'll take it. So the way that our platform works and kind of the premise behind what we developed is that we recognize through a lot of research and personal experience that the best way to get to understand the ethics of a person and to get to understand a person's character, and also to understand the things they've been involved in the past, where those might be criminal, is through an interview. Now, the other piece of that is not all interviews are created equally. I mean, Yariv and I have interviewed thousands of people in our lives in situations where we're asking them about counterproductive behaviors. But the vast majority of HR folks who are interviewing people for jobs are not going to focus on that. They're not focusing on counterproductive behaviors because it's not very, you know, it's not a nice thing to talk about. And unfortunately, in our culture, when we're doing interviews for candidates, you know, we tend to focus on all the positives. You know, there needs to be a conversation about ethical behavior and about your ethical and moral standing. And
So
a
how
lot
do
of
you-
times that conversation can be, sorry, what was that?
Can you just to sort of help me understand? Because I assume you're not like asking somebody like, hey, have you ever committed fraud? But like, what are some of the questions that you guys are asking to elicit somebody's underlying ethics?
So let me parking lot that question for just a second, Phil, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So the way that our platform works is, you know, we recognize that interviews are the way to get this stuff, but not all interviews are created equally, and interviews don't scale. It's always, I have to be in the interviewer seat, you have to be in the interviewee seat. Sometimes there's a witness there. And so you're talking about 3 work hours for every hour that an interview takes place. Now, what we did was we recognized that and said, okay, how can we apply technology and AI to ask these questions in a way that is going to elicit the right response, that is going to elicit a more open response? And so using a lot of research into things like the way that people react to questions, just like you said, very direct questions. Have you ever been involved in a fraud? that together with how they react to those questions being posed by a machine instead of a person, as well as research into how do people react to certain feedback or certain warnings while they're in the midst of taking this interview and while they're in the midst of answering these questions. And so we put together this automated online interview that does exactly what you just mentioned. It presents those questions. They're all very direct. And like you said, that is a great example of the kind of thing we ask. We ask face valid questions about involvement, about ethical attitudes, about willingness to report others involved in misconduct, and also on the current employee side of what we do rather than the pre-employment side. On the current employee side of what we do, we also ask about observations in the workplace. And you'd probably be a little bit surprised what people will admit to when they're placed in that situation. But we have people admit to being involved with gangs, who admit to having committed fraud in the past, who admit to having stolen in the past or having sexually harassed colleagues in the past. And a lot of that's down to the psychology of how we pose the questions, the way they're presented, but also what our platform does and the information that it delivers to the interviewee takes advantage of kind of the feeling of situational stress that some people feel when they're in that kind of interview, but also we show them messages that kind of increase their feelings of accountability as well. You know, things like, you know, we may have already done a background check and we may have already done a reference check, and this is going to be compared to that. And so we take advantage of all of that stuff to basically gather intel from the actual interviewee, but we do it in a very non-adversarial way. And everything we do is very intentionally developed and written based on academic research, reviewed by industrial psychologists and also seasoned investigators, so that we're gathering intelligence and we're all on the same team. And we just want to understand that your ethical attitudes are the same as mine and that they fit this organization's culture.
Interesting. And how do you guys have confidence that, I mean, obviously, you know, if you're sort of identifying incremental people that are potential bad actors, like that's great. I guess there's two things that come to mind. One is like my guess is there's a lot of like gray area within somebody's ethical spectrum, and obviously you want it to be an A plus, but maybe somebody's a B plus, and that might increase their chances of doing something unethical in the future. But how do you know like when you want to take action and not hire somebody or remove them from the workforce?
So that's a great question, and it's down to the way that our platform is designed. You know, we don't call our platform an assessment because it's not like an assessment is. You know, an assessment is really kind of a static snapshot in time of how someone is right now. And typically that's geared towards skills, aptitude, and also personality. What our platform does, and the reason we call it an online interview, is because the way we present the findings is we present it in a way with this interviewee answered this question in this way. And it's for you, the interviewer, to decide, is this answer something that I need to get more information about? You know, so say for example, an interviewee admitted that they've been in a fight at work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the way that our platform presents that information is it just shows them, you know, this interviewee said that they've been in a fight at work. And the whole premise behind that is like, now as an interviewer, I just go in and I reframe that question to them. Say, hey, tell me more about this. Because that doesn't mean they're unhireable. You know, just because somebody got in a fight at work doesn't mean they're unhireable, but it might mean that there are some risk factors there with regard to workplace violence. Mm-hmm. And so we present this as almost like an augmented interview, in that it's not, there are no two interviews that are going to end up being the same, and that there are no two interviewers that are going to interpret those results the same. And sorry, go ahead.
What sort of companies or roles is this good for?
It actually, you know, I hate to say this because I know I sound wishy-washy, but every time somebody asks me this question, I say the same thing. We're really industry agnostic. You know, we have clients who are in law enforcement. We have clients that are in government service. We have clients that are all over the private sector as well, in banking, in manufacturing, in, you know, you name it. Now there are certainly places where you're going to see an ROI faster than other places. And typically that's in a situation where you have a known issue, where you have experienced a problem in the past and you apply this to a certain kind of subset of candidates or a certain subset of employees. That's a very quick way to experience an ROI on this platform. But in all honesty, it gets to the meat of the kind of thing that you should really be after when you're hiring people. You know, one of the strongest studies I've ever seen in job success said there are two things that outweigh everything by like orders of magnitude. And one of those is intellectual capability, and the other one is ethical attitudes. So if you can get integrity and skills right, then you're off to the races and you're going to have successful employees. And so it really, because of the way we're designed, it's applicable to an awful lot of cases.
From time to time, I'm finding myself mentioning that in different meeting that we have. Essentially, people are opportunists. For some of us, opportunity is when no one is watching the cashier. What we do, we help to identify those very early in the process. Since we are considered as an interview, that can be the first engagement that you can do with your applicants, with your candidate, and not like background check where you have to give conditional offer before you can do background check screening on candidate, and that puts you in the end of the process. Another benefit that our tool brings, at least in my opinion, it gives the people the voice to explain themselves. So if someone, for example, had some past criminal habit or behavior that he states during the interview, essentially, whoever gonna interview him and speak with him, gonna give him the opportunity to explain what happened there. He might gonna have perfect excuse or explain to why he has done what he ever done, and essentially he's gonna get the job versus to receive some document that says someone stole something from somewhere and that's the end of the story for him.
Do you guys have some sort of like, you know, key metric that you track? Like we've done, I don't know, like 1 million assessments, or we, you know, work with like X amount of companies or something like that you might be able to share?
Actually,
sorry, go ahead, Yariv.
we do, and we have collected data recently for 2022, and I need to search for the data because I don't have it in front of me. I need a minute and I can tell you some statistic that might be very meaningful. Here it is. We gathered the top 6 crime involvement in previous workplace as reported by candidate in 2022. 3% of the candidates had bribery past involvement, 2% confidential information, 9% theft from workplace, 7% use of illegal drugs, 1% sexual harassment, 5% workplace violence, and 73% didn't have any criminals indicator.
Awesome. I know we're sort of at a time here. Any last I don't know, things you guys wanted to share with our audience about what you guys are up to?
So there's one other piece that we really hadn't talked about. I'm not sure if it's completely, you know, as relevant for your audience, but I believe, you know, it's kind of one of those things where it's a tangential issue that ends up coming up certainly for human resource involvement. And we're using this platform for employee investigations now. It's something that we've been doing for a little over a year. We've taken the same concept that we do for pre-employment interviews and applied them to very specific incident situations where you have something that occurs, you need to interview people. This is the software that you send out the interviews through, and you get that information back, and you end up reaching, I mean, orders of magnitude efficiency, where you were spending, 3 man hours working an interview previously. Now you're spending 20 minutes on each person because you're just following up on findings. And what we found is that it improves the employee experience tremendously, because all of those people who you would have had to send your loss prevention folks to interview, you would have had to send your HR folks to interview, and they would have basically had to do the walk of shame over to the office, across the shop floor to talk to, so-and-so about this interview. Now they can just take it on a device. They're done with it in about 20 minutes. And if they need follow-up, then they get follow-up, but otherwise they're done and they can go back to work and not be bothered with it. So that's another piece of what we're doing that I believe is really important, and that we're having some very, very good feedback from our clients about.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your journey, what you guys are up to. And if people want to check you out, I guess they go to Verensics.com.
Yep, Verensics.com. And we've got some short kind of explainer videos that we just produced on there. That's they're quick hits, takes about 2 minutes, and does probably a better job explaining it than I do. So
sounds good. Thank you guys.
Thank
thank
you.
you, Phil, so much. Appreciate it.